Dave, do you like pina coladas?
And getting caught in the rain,
Yeah.
Brad?
Have you ever heard that song?
Yeah, okay, who hasn't? The lyrics for that song are bonkers, though.
Yes.
They're bonkers when you break it down. Because, like, as a kid, you first hear that song and you're like, if you like pina... And first of all, you don't know what a pina colada is.
Right.
And so you're singing along, if you like pina coladas. And then you start to break it down, though. The lyrics are bonkers, Brad. They're bonkers.
The whole thing, and by the way, for anyone under 40 years old, part of it is the old personal ad section in the newspaper where you take out a personal ad to say that, you know, you're looking
my God,
for...
yeah, I didn't even think about that. There's a whole, like, a background that you have to give now to younger kids about what's going on there.
You can't even, you can't, I mean, it was what we did, it was Tinder, but it was in print. You couldn't swipe left, you had to turn the page. But this person puts out a personal ad that says, if you like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, then maybe you'd be my love match, because he's in an unhappy relationship with his girlfriend. Right? So somebody answers the personal ad and they make a date and he gets a big surprise.
A big surprise, but because it's his own girlfriend. Like he described what he thought was the perfect person. You know, if you like getting pina coladas, getting caught in the rain, like it's sort of this romantic thing.
Yes.
You know, like, oh, how fun, walks along the beach kind of a thing. She shows up at the arranged date that was all done via print, as Brad said.
Yeah.
And then they both, this is the part that's bonkers to me. They both go, oh, ha, 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 you were going to cheat on me. Oh, ha, 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 I was going to cheat on you. Oh, aren't we perfect for each other, right?
You got your cheating in my peanut butter. You got your adultery in my chocolate.
I mean, when she walks in, it's like, it was my own lovely lady, and she said, oh, it's you. Then we laughed for a moment, and I said, I never knew.
Yeah.
That's bonkers.
Yeah.
Like, basically, they both were caught out on it with the person that they were trying to cheat on.
And it renews their love.
And both went,
Not only that, but have you taken a long walk on the beach? It's miserable.
Or getting caught in the rain.
Yeah.
Who enjoys getting a low soak at 45 degrees out? You know, like.
Yeah. Oh, I love getting caught in the rain. Nobody loves getting caught in the rain. And long walks on the beach, your ankles hurt after a couple of yards. It's the worst. I'd rather stay inside and read the personal ad.
I'll tell you what I would rather do. I would rather say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics, I'm Brad Guigar, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, who also enjoys pina coladas, and I'm the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We've got a fun show for everybody, and we want to start it off by jumping right into a topic that Brad and I heard last night. The National Cartoonists Society had a live stream where our friend Jamar Nicholas interviewed Karen Evans and Greg Evans, the creators of Luanne, the comic strip, which is celebrating its 40th year, which is no small thing to have celebrated 40 years in newspapers. And first of all, they were a delight. We've got to have them on the show. They were really fun. Yeah. But Brad, you specifically sparked on something that I sort of saw it as a passing interest, but you're like, hold on, there's more there.
Oh, it was so fascinating. So Greg was talking, he was showing a photo of his studio, and it's got one red wall. And he says, by the way, about that red wall, he says, when I was first starting out, Mel Lazarus, the creator of the comic strip Miss Peach, Mel Lazarus told me that the color red boosted creativity. So Greg goes, so I painted one of the walls in my studio red. Right. And it was a throwaway comment. Right. But I had the chat open in the Zoom meeting. Right. And all of a sudden, flooding into the chat.
Yeah, the chat previously had been quiet, by the way.
Relatively so. And everybody had the same question. And by the way, it was the question that I was asking, too.
Yeah.
Did it work? did the color red make you more creative? And it was in that moment, it was such a feeling of unity for all these creative people, because all of us want to paint the wall red. We all want to. I want to paint the wall red. Dave, you want to paint the wall red. And it comes to the nature of creativity. It's very forgivable. It's very human because creativity is so amorphous, so hard to pin down. When we did the Reuben Awards last year at the NCS convention, you took around that recording unit. We talked to all these creative people about how they make creativity happen. And all of these things fall into several categories. We heard different variations of the same story over and over and over again. For example, we heard some people tell us about the importance of getting bored, right? Turn off your phone, step away from the computer, unplug the TV, set down the video game controller, remove the distractions and get bored, right? But Dave, I don't want to get bored. I want to paint the wall red. You see what I mean? I want one simple thing I can do, paint that wall red. I don't want to do that. We heard people talk about carry around a notepad. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And it's not about because Greg also talked about that. He said somebody told him to carry around a notepad. He says his entire life he wrote 2 words in the notepad. Because he doesn't think that way, right? But we hear other people say, carry a notepad, be prepared to, have the Notes app on your first screen on your phone. Dave, I know you do voice recordings quite often,
Myself,
right?
Yep.
And it's not about the item. It's not about the device. It's about adopting a mindset that's always open to thinking creatively, right? When you're driving, when you're doing the dishes, when you're doing the yard work, I guarantee you that some of our single panel cartoonist friends like Mark Parisi or Liz Donnelly or Jason Chatfield, I guarantee you they've got a cartoon somewhere in their archives about soapy dishwater because they were just thinking while they were doing dishes, right? Yeah, but I don't want to do that. I want to paint the wall red. I don't want to let time be my editor like we talk about all the time, about writing something, but not posting it right away, coming back in a couple days and looking at it cold and then improving it. I don't want to do that. Right, I want to paint the wall red. And I just wanted to talk about this one shared moment of oneness that we all had, because creativity is so difficult to pin down. And it's really at the linchpin of everything we do. And all of us, if we hear this one weird trick, we are all, believe me, in that moment, Dave, in the meeting, if Greg Evans had looked into the camera and said, yes, that red wall made me 36.5% more creative, there would have been a run on red paint the next day in all corners of America from 100 people, and also in Philadelphia, who were painting their walls red.
Yeah. And so context of that story, I was lucky enough before he passed to visit Mel Lazarus in his LA studio, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. And first of all, Mel had painted his whole studio red, Brad, right? But here's the other thing that gets left out in that story about how Mel found creativity. Mel's house, if you can imagine it, was kind of a very squared off U shape. Can you imagine that in your mind? Like a very squared off U shape, right? Mm-hmm. And in the middle of the U shape was a gorgeous pool because he lived in Woodland Hills, California. And his studio was painted red, but it had big windows facing out at that pool. And I'll tell you what inspires creativity is California sun coming in, bouncing off a pool right into your studio. He had a gorgeous studio. It was really lovely. He also was a fan of scotch. So you would go over and visit his house and you would get scotch and sit by the pool, and suddenly you felt very creative. And I don't know how much the red walls affected his creativity. But I mean, bless him. Mel did Miss Peach. He did Momma. He did, what was the other? He did a third strip for a while too, didn't he?
Oh gosh, you're right. I forgot. Momma's probably the more popular of the two, but yeah, he did a few of them.
But yeah, Miss Peach also had an incredibly long run. And anyway, so I just want to give credit where credit's due. Mel also built himself a wonderful life in that Woodland Hills house. It was great. It was a great place.
Yeah. And also, not for nothing, and certainly not casting aspersions on Greg, but you'll notice that wall is still red.
It is still red. Also, I don't know if you noticed this, because I've also been in Greg's studio down in San Marcos, and he has 2 Peanuts originals hanging on his wall.
Oh, my God.
And so I'm walking into a studio, and I go, "Oh, Greg, no one needs 2. Surely one can be satisfied with 1, and pass along another one to a friend, a trusted friend in Los Angeles who doesn't have any." Well, I mean, that seems like just basic charity. Is we don't need 2 Peanuts originals. Anyway, he's got a great studio and a great collection of originals. But yes, the red wall is still there.
Yeah, it's still red. So here's my question. Do you have any superstitions around your own creativity? Because I think we all do. We all do these things. We become, because again, there's no way you can turn it on and turn it off.
Yes.
Do you have superstitions?
Yes. I must admit that I sort of have superstitions in the sense that I have trigger actions, that if I do this thing, I don't know if superstition is the right way, but I have a faith, whether it's false or true, that an idea will be the end result of this action, these series of actions, right? So if I make myself a full cup of coffee and I get a very specific notebook off of my shelf and I sit in a very specific chair in my studio, I am giving my brain 100% a trigger that's saying you are about to be creative. You're going to spend the next hour and you're going to stand up with an idea written on this pad that you can turn into a comic strip. And you tell me, is that superstition, or is that a series of actions that I have now put a superstition on, or an untoward faith? Because there's no guarantee, even after 25 years of cartooning, Lord knows that there's no guarantee that I'll have an idea at the end of that session. But the very fact that I force myself to sit there in a set of conditions and try to be creative, I'll be honest, 90% of the time it works. You know what I mean? Maybe not 90, maybe 85. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But let me turn
73.
Yeah. The point being that it works enough that I have now invested a certain amount of faith in it. And that's what I'm trying to say, right?
So your question is it superstition or is it strategy? And the answer is yes.
Yes. The answer is yes.
The answer is do I like you in the moment, or do I want to take the piss out of you in the moment? Because if I'm feeling charitable, I'll say that's strategy. Absolutely. If I want to take the piss out of you, I'll say you're superstitious. Yeah. Well, and I'd be right both times.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so let me flip it around on my friend. If Brad Guigar have superstitions about being creative?
Yes. I have a chair right in that corner of the studio that I sit in when I'm writing, always the same chair. And by the way, also I do that a little bit on purpose, because if it ain't happening and I get up and I move to someplace else, I'm kind of telling my brain, okay, that wasn't working, but this is going to work, right?
Yeah.
If you look over in that other corner of my studio, I've been using the same brand of sketchbook.
Same.
For years and years. In fact, I bring this up from time to time. My wife, very, very, with love in her heart, bought me a sketchbook for Christmas. It was completely different, leather bound, beautiful sketchbook. Nope,
leather can't work. No, it's too nice.
That was beautiful. I couldn't wait to get to the end of it, so I go back to my. I use a Canson sketchbook with blank pages, hard bound, because I can't take it seriously if it's not hard bound. It's hard. It's hardcover bound. I've been using the same one for over 20 years. I just buy the same one over and over and over again. I've got a certain type of pencil I use, because the other pencils don't write. I use a mechanical pencil.
The ideas don't come as good with a different kind of pencil. That's true.
That yellow one, in fact, they just changed the leads, and it's kind of screwing me up a little bit. I can tell they changed the lead.
Can I tell you, I also noticed that a pencil that I used a lot, they changed the leads.
I think they switched. The yellow kind? I don't know where I got one here, but I think it's Bic. It's the reason I use it is cheap, but I like the way the lead spreads.
Yeah. For me, it was Dixon Ticonderoga. I think they cheapened out on their leads. after 100 years of using a certain kind of lead. I can't, I have no way of proving it. I just feel it in my bones that they've changed the lead. But anyway, and I know it's not lead for those that are going to email in. I know it's carbon, but go to hell. Anyway. Kellett
getting spicy over the lead over there.
But anyway, so it's fascinating that we both have created systems that are akin to superstitions, if we're being honest about it. But they're also comfort zones. Because it's a little bit like, let me have my little comfy pillow of creativity to work in because I need my special coffee. And I mean, honest to God, the ideal conditions are my dog sitting on my lap to the side of me in the little wedge between myself and the chair, a very specific chair, a coffee, a pillow on my lap with a very specific notebook on it and a very specific pen.
Yeah.
And frankly, a specific time of day, the house has to be quiet or else I'll have Mozart piano on in the background. Mm-hmm. I know that's so weird to say it, but it has to be Mozart's piano.
Can't have lyrics.
Yeah,
it's got to be instrumental. Whatever it is, it's got to be instrumental.
Can't have lyrics. And is that my painted red room? Maybe it is. I don't know.
But even more importantly, if somebody convinced you that painting one wall red would improve your creativity, you do it. Same as me. Or if hanging a wind chime would make me more creative. Yeah. And by the way, if somebody like Mel Lazarus says that red makes you more creative, you got to kind of listen to the guy a little bit. He kind of knows his stuff.
Especially with his longevity. I think he was the second longest comic strip cartoonist in American history. So yes, you listen to Mel Lazarus. I mean, I do kind of feel like, though, was that study commissioned by the folks at Sherwin-Williams, though? You know what I mean?
Because red paint is like 5% more expensive.
You know how you hear a medical study and they're always like, oh, it turns out chocolate is good for the heart or something. And then you find out suddenly like, wait a minute, that study was co-funded by Cadbury? And then, okay, this all makes sense. You get very suspicious in a capitalist society of certain medical research. And so like when I hear the thing of like, oh yeah, red, because I know that they also studied the color pink, and apparently that's soothing for inmates in a prison.
Yeah.
Tuna fish, and apparently the color pink are apparently soothing for inmates. I don't know why. Who did this study and how did this come about? Like, turns out the hamburgers make them 5% more aggressive. Let's give them tuna. Hey, that worked. All right.
I got a feeling Chicken of the Sea was in there somewhere.
But so if someone told me that scientifically a red wall gave you, I don't know, 10 to 15, what percentage would it have to be for you to paint one wall of your studio or your entire studio red?
The entire studio, it would have to be a high percentage, but one wall, my tipping point would come pretty low. Okay, depending on who told me, the veracity of who told me. Be honest with yourself. 10%. If I was told I could get a 10% bump in creativity by painting a wall red, wouldn't you have to do it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you have to? Who wouldn't give an afternoon of painting and a red wall for 10% more creativity? Right? And by the way, we're saying this knowing that it's bananas. Like there's no way it could possibly be truthful. Yeah. But if Mel Lazarus,
by God, yeah. But then if you have an accent wall in your studio, you've suddenly turned your studio into a 90s dining room. Remember when 90s dining rooms all had an accent wall? That was like the big thing. They all had an accent wall in the 90s. Like, see, this wall's darker. That's an accent wall. And
you're looking at a guy when he and his wife moved into their house for the first time. We had an entirely red bedroom. And an entirely red, it wasn't red like fire. It was like a deep burgundy red.
Sure.
Same thing for the dining room, and the living room was hunter green. It was that whole there was a whole period of time in the 90s where everything was like dark red and brass fixtures and hunter green.
All the colors of like an English pub. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And that was our whole house.
Well, let me ask you an important question that the whole audience is asking now. Now that we know that your bedroom is painted red, any creativity happening in there, Brad? You seem to be happily married.
As a matter of fact, one is 22, the other was 19.
So Mel Lazarus, may his memory be a blessing. He was right. He was right. Good job, Mel. Anyway, so maybe. Maybe.
Oh, geez, I just made Dave is turning. Speaking of red, Dave is making me 20% more creative just by looking at the color of his face.
All you have to do is embarrass me, and then Brad's creativity shoots up because I'm scarlet
that
red.
always happens. So,
I mean, what is this? Because here's the problem. Let's get to the problem behind the problem. Is that it is hard to be creative on a recurring basis.
Yes.
If this was easy, it would be done by everyone. This is why there's a certain amount of professionalism to showing up every day, every week, every month with new ideas, whether people in your life or yourself is sick, whether your mortgage is late, whether you have broken a leg, whether all the conditions of your life are not being amenable to creativity, you have to be creative. And so I think all of us are looking for any life hack that gives us just a little bit more creativity. And that's where this comes from, because it is hard sometimes. Like, I'm currently kind of in a writer's block at the moment, coming off of a Kickstarter. I had this sort of like, I don't know how to describe it other than sort of denouement after an act break of a story that has had high action, and now all of a sudden I'm like, I'm low energy, I don't know. And so I would kill for a 10% boost in creativity right now. Kill for it. And granted, I'm not looking for that life hack. Hey, murder is the way to get to get more creativity. But what I'm saying is, if I could find something that was a quick on switch, I would probably try it. Granted, painting takes too many hours, but if there was a quick on switch, I would try it. I mean, and you would too, I know, if you're in a certain writing block.
Let's face it, being creative at any given period of time is a complete mystery. We did a show years ago where I likened it to that trick where you put a ball underneath a cup, and then you raise the cup and the ball's still there. And sometimes you raise the cup and there's no ball there, right? That magic trick.
Yes.
The whole act of writing, the whole act of being creative is having that cup and lifting it up to see if there's a ball there. And sometimes the ball's there and sometimes it's not. Yeah. And you have no control over how that happens. Every time you sit down with a blank sheet of paper in that same sketchbook you've been using for 20 years, and you sit down to write, you have no idea how it happens, why it happens, if it's going to happen this time, or whether you're going to sit there and spin your wheels for an hour. And then, and if you do spin your wheels for 20 minutes, are you going to maybe another 5 minutes? And maybe it's just around the corner. Now it's been an hour. Well, maybe it needs to be 90 minutes. Maybe I need to stop, but maybe I'm going to stop too soon. Yeah. Maybe if I would have kept going.
Maybe it was right around the corner. Yeah.
Right. You can see how a life like that, after a little while, makes you a little bit nuts. Yeah. Because you never know when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. And then in the shower, it happens.
Yeah. For no reason that's discernible. Yeah.
Yes. And you're like, well, then clearly I need to do all my writing in the shower. Last night on the Zoom, they're talking about somebody that supposedly has shower crayons because they get so many great ideas in the shower.
I think Brendan said he would write in the shower.
Oh my God.
Which kind of tracks with Bloom County. But anyway, because it is, you lift that cup up off and 80% of the time, like I said, the ball is there, but the 20% is not. And you're confuzzled. Yeah. You're like, well, what were the conditions that made the ball appear? And you try to scientifically work it out. Right. And the only ways. So now let's talk about what does work for me, right? Because I think this is helpful. We've talked about these before, but we can just real quick list off what does work for us.
Yeah.
I will say giving myself a good night's sleep seems to be helpful. Oddly enough, though, sometimes when I'm overtired, my brain goes wonky, and then I get crazy ideas. So that's even that is non-discernible as a cause and effect. I will say hanging around funny people and interesting conversations, not even necessarily funny conversations. I had a conversation one time with a cousin who is a professor at Stanford of microbiology and who's trying to teach me the very specific work his lab is doing. And I was so confused, but fascinated. Yeah. And I'll be honest, none of it was funny, but it triggered whole storylines in Drive a couple weeks later. And so the connection there for me was being exposed to more interesting people and more interesting ideas is itself a generator of ideas. Not right away, but there is a causality there. And then reading my old work, that's helpful when I try to remind myself who I am and what my sense of humor is and what my idea flow is. Reading old work, especially sort of the greatest hits, I'm like, oh yeah, I do have it. I know I have it. And this is the kind of writing that gets me there. So I got to work on that. And then honestly, the things that do work for me are getting bored or an action that is itself boring. Showering is boring and relaxing. So it has that magical 1-2 punch. Washing dishes, boring and kind of relaxing if you think about it. And just distracting enough for a certain part of your brain where the motor functions are distracted, and so your brain can wander because, to Brad's earlier point, being bored works. A creative mind seeks entertainment when it is bored. And so long drives, showers, washing dishes, chores around the house, mowing a lawn, all of those work because your brain is like, dear God, I've got to entertain myself. So let's try to write something right now. How about you, Brad? What works for you? What are the strategies that work for you?
All those things that you talked about are very, very familiar. And I'll even throw in, especially in the summer, I am not above pouring a nice glass of scotch and going on the back deck and sitting there and seeing if some writing can happen. Right. I enjoy that in the summertime evening air, but also. Just to co-sign everything you said and to reiterate, some of those good strategies, like to be open to thinking creatively all day, and whether that means you have a notebook or the Notes app on the first screen or whatever. In other words, have something ready to capture that idea, right. And then put yourself in the position of always thinking creatively, even if you're doing yard work, if you're doing, whatever you're doing, driving down the road. To think those kind of what if thoughts that make creativity happen. And then the other one that I've got to learn every week all over, like it's Groundhog Day. The other one that really, really is important for me is to just start the pencil moving.
Yeah.
Make an image, make a sentence. Like, I don't know how this scene is going to work. Well, write the first sentence. It's probably the wrong sentence. But once you write once you write that scene, then you can see somewhere in the middle is the actual scene. And in fact, some of the advice I've given on this show 100 times, especially for comic strips, go back after you've written it, get rid of that first panel. 9 chances out of 10, you didn't need it, right? But just to write. Just to start writing. And then somewhere in the middle is the good stuff. It's something that you can use and then you can edit. But how often do you do it? Same as me. You stare at that blank page, absolutely convinced that you could never improve it by putting a mark on it. And you're stymied, you're stuck, you're atrophied.
Yeah.
And it's this lesson I've got to teach myself every week, and because some of that has to do with fear and getting confidence and so on and so forth. Making that first mark is like me, I tend to be very towards the writing side, right? The writing is very important, so I focus on sentences. But there's a lot of people, especially gag cartoonists, single panel folks, that you hear them talking about they start sketching, and a scene will appear in front of them. And they're like, okay, how could that scene be funny? What would be the funniest caption to put underneath that scene? Right. And so it kind of comes about, and I don't know that would work so well for a story, but for a single panel, that would work marvelously, right?
Yeah.
So it all comes down to making that first mark to get your brain moving that way.
Boy, do I co-sign that. And I will say it in a slightly different way, which I think is to the same end that Brad is saying there in terms of starting and making that first mark, which is, for me, I have found that having a deadline is very helpful towards giving me the confidence / what's the other word descriptor you use, Brad? Not just confidence, but lack of fear, basically.
Yeah.
It removes the fear and encourages confidence, because when the deadline is looming, and I want you to imagine a rapidly declining set of time, right? And you're like, not a good idea, not a good idea, not a good idea. This idea can work. I can make this happen, right? And but you have the confidence because the deadline is forcing you, and you know from experience, like, I can make this shine once I start taking action on it. And also, the deadline itself just gives you the confidence to say, no, this idea is good enough. This is a good idea. I'm waiting for the perfect idea to strike like lightning. Yeah. This is an idea with work and effort over the next 3 or 4 hours. I can make into a really solid comic. And so, or a solid page or solid this. So a deadline I find helpful in that it encourages making the decision. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which often fear and a lack of confidence can put off interminably if it wants to, you know? Mm-hmm. Hey, gang, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we'll tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
Yeah, because when you do, you'll get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And you'll get access to our exclusive Discord server, a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And ho Nelly, if you want even more comics goodness in your life, check out the new drawing show that we're doing with our pal Kevin McShane over at wrongwayshow.com. That's wrongwayshow.com.
In each episode, we'll show you how to draw your favorite cartoon characters the wrong way.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Oh, and I can tell by the music, once again, it's time for Susan MacTaggart to come in and give one of our $10 Comic Lab backers a personal affirmation. Go ahead, Susan, would you like to come in?
Bradley John, I love to see you, Bradley John. Bradley, I understand that you live in Philadelphia, Bradley John. Is that correct, yes, Bradley John?
That's
right. 24-hour stores in Philadelphia. Isn't that right, Bradley John?
There are 24-hour stores, yes.
Because the thing I'm wondering, Bradley John, is there a 24-hour fitness near you? Because my goodness, it's working, Bradley John. It's working, whatever you're doing, Bradley John.
I've been working on my core, yes.
Oh, yes. Bradley John. Lovely Bradley John. So, who is it that needs an affirmation this week from
This week, we're going to send out a personal affirmation to Comic Lab backer Jillian Rowe.
Jillian. Oh, lovely Jillian. I want to say, Jillian, thank you for supporting Comic Lab on Patreon and that little hot dish of lasagna, Bradley John. I want to say, Jillian, your art has value. Your art has value, Jillian. And so I want you to remember that the next time your family asks you if you're still looking for a real job. Because, Jillian, you need to hand them an invoice, Jillian. Your art has value. It has value, Jillian. So take that into your heart from me to you. Chase your dreams, Jillian, and look towards the brighter future. That's your personal affirmation.
Oh, my gosh.
From Comic Lab and from that hot little stick of butter, Bradley John, over here. Patreon.com/Comic Lab, Jillian.
Oh, Susan, thank you so much for dropping up. Thank you so much for dropping by once again.
Well, Bradley John, thank you so much for dropping jaws wherever you go, Bradley John. Bradley John, I'll see you next week. And Jillian, you stay affirmed, sweetheart. Stay affirmed.
Oh, my goodness. David, I don't know whether you missed her. Susan was just here to drop
putting the headphones back on, Brad. Putting the headphones back on. Wonderful. That's great. Was able to send out an affirmation. That's nice.
Yes. That was amazing. So now that we're all recovering from that personal affirmation time, we've got a question from another Comic Lab backer, and it goes like this. Coming in from Sam, who says, first, a huge thank you for your push to try Blue Sky. I've been trying out social media for over a decade and always felt overwhelmed or like a failure. However, I gave Blue Sky a shot, and wowza, it's going great so far. So kind of a great comment there. Yes. Now for a question. I have a big, bold idea that I plan to bring to life one day, a jukebox musical that tells the story of an ancient myth using songs from one of my favorite bands. I studied theater in college, and even though it's at least 10 years down the line, I'm really excited about this project. I could sit on this idea until I have the time, money, and resources to produce this play. But since I'm a comic artist, I feel that I could do a fun graphic novel project too. At cons, the Do You Like This Band? Here's a graphic novel based on their discography is an exciting selling point. However, if I were to create this comic, I'm curious as to how much I can reference the band's lyrics before I get into legal/IP trouble. What should I look out for? How much can I quote the band's lyrics, like using 20 lines from 20 different songs throughout the 100 plus page comic? Or should I avoid all of that entirely? Do I need a lawyer? Admittedly, I don't need to quote the band's lyrics, but that's my artistic vision, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks, guys, from Sam. So let's give her some thoughts here in terms of using these lyrics and this project in general. Where do we land on that?
First of all, I like the concept. I think the idea is fun. So I for what that's worth, Sam, I'm intrigued by that. As you can imagine, I just want to do brass tacks in terms of comics. Yeah. As you can immediately sense, Sam, the power of lyrics from a band are infinitely less powerful written out in a comic than the lyrics in a live staged musical. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking of any band you can think of, Brad. ABBA, Queen, anyone that's had stuff turned into a musical. Yeah, the songs are so crisp and clear that in terms of how they evoke emotion, that to just say the lyrics is like a pale shadow of what they're able to evoke. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure Sam knows this anyway, but just lyrics by themselves are never as evocative as hearing, I don't know, the Rolling Stones or Kanye West sing, the lyrics themselves. So you're laughing because those
I was waiting for you to drop some Kanye West lyrics on us.
No, I know my singing ability, and I'm not going to do anything. So anyway, so there's just that. There's that but then it gets into the very specific thing about quoting any other form of art in your art, and what is permissible and how much is permissible, and what are the actions to make it permissible if it's not permissible. And Brad, we were talking about this before the show, and you brought up a really good point about AI companies and one of our fundamental complaints. And I think that will help trigger this conversation a little bit. Do you mind repeating that?
It's interesting, and by the way, I'm certainly not casting aspersions on Sam for this, because it's something that is, again, is similar to our first topic of the show, very universal in that.
Yeah, we quoted Pina Colada, for God's sakes.
Yes. Yeah. And that's going to come full circle in a minute. But so the situation is, what is our big complaint when it comes to AI as artists and writers? That nobody asked our permission. They used our content without permission. Nobody asked my permission to use Evil Inc. Nobody used Dave's permission to use Sheldon or Drive. And that's really at the heart of a lot of the problems. And that's not, the only problems, but that's kind of like one of the big top problems that artists and writers have with artificial intelligence is nobody asked us. And it's very interesting to me, again, in terms of just all of us being humans, that when the shoe's on the other foot, the last thing that comes to mind is asking permission, right? Instead, it's how far can I go until I'm in trouble?
Yes. Yeah. Also guilty of that, by the way. I'm throwing myself under the bus on that. Yeah.
Very normal, very natural. And you can bet Dave and I did not reach out to get permission to do the Pina Colada song. And when it comes to copyright, there is free use. Free use is something that appears in copyright, and it gives you the ability to use copyrighted material under certain constraints without running afoul of copyright infringement.
Right.
And remember, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to jump in and just give a broad-based history of what copyright means, because it literally means, from the first iteration of it, the right to copy. So William Hogarth, 1740s, 1750s England, he would make plates of his comics. Literally, cartoonists were the progenitors of copyright. Yeah. William Hogarth in London, England, would make plates of his comics. But the problem was people on the other side of London were making cheaper knockoffs that would be selling for a lower price, but also stealing his business, right? So stealing the ability to sell a plate to someone or a plate print to someone, but then also making it crappier, which also pissed him off. Like it was a bad version of his cartoon, right? And so he went to Parliament, and I'm going to get the date wrong, but I think it was either 1746 or 1747. They passed the Copyright Act, basically giving an artist the ability to control who and when gets to reproduce a piece of work and how they profit on it. So now in a modern level, copyright really comes down to two things, like who gets to make money off of an idea, a piece of art, a thing that's added to the culture, who gets to make money off it, and then also who gets to use it and in what context, right? And so one is more of an ethical question, one is definitely a financial and capitalist question. But they play hand in hand, and mostly it comes down to permission, or in the cases of permission with money involved, licensing. And so both Brad and I and the wider world allow for the free use of certain types of copyright in certain conditions. For example, if a library or a school says, look, I'm not going to make any money from this comic. This is for the betterment of society, that the library wants to use this comic. First of all, because they asked, but also because there's no profit involved. I always say yes, right? And thank you for asking, and you, of course, have my permission. But the truth is, if a library is not making any money on it, and they're just using it for the betterment, that probably falls under fair use, right? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but that seems to me morally, ethically, to fall under fair use of what it's meant to do, which is to encourage the wider use of this idea in culture, but still allow the artist to be remunerated for their work and their effort and their creativity, right? So the idea is getting spread by fair use. No one's making a profit on it. Therefore, I'm not getting any of that slice as well. But in this case, for this specific question, Sam, your project, your wider project, eventually you would like to be making money from. You want this to be a project that you will, for the most part, own the copyright on. 99% of it will be your copyright. And in part of the process of making this, there will be a progenitor of the storyline, which will be the lyrics of an already existing bit of music. Those copyrights do not belong to you. Now, in a fair use system where you weren't making a profit on it, you were trying to educate kids, or you were trying to get an idea across in an article, totally fine to quote something in short passages. And that's why you see in most copyright pages, the author reserves full rights to this book, but reviewers and journalists are allowed to quote small passages for this or that use, right? Because most people understand that's a fair use of the art. But in your case, the lyrics will become a jumping off point morally, ethically, and story-wise for your story. And so in that case, the copyright, I think, you have to seek permission from the band, or the lyricist at least, not necessarily the band, the lyricist. Because remember, this is going to get confusing. There's two copyrights in a recorded song we should talk about, Brad. The lyrics and the song recorded itself. And the copyright for a recorded song is not a circle C, it's a circle P, which is rarely seen, but I think it comes from phonograph, Brad. Is that right? I forget what
I thought it stood for patent.
No, definitely not patent. No. But I think it was from phonograph. I don't remember. Okay. I'd have to look that up. Anyway, not a lawyer. Just reminding people that the copyright system is slightly different from music. There is the lyricist holds one copyright and the performer holds a separate copyright. So there's two involved. In your case, you would just be going for the lyricist. But you still kind of have to seek permission here and possibly a licensing fee. So am I wrong in thinking that, Brad?
No. I mean, listen, it's a really great excuse to talk about fair use when it comes to copyright, right? And some of the factors that come into fair use, like purpose, which you talked about, if it's educational or whether it's a parody, then very often you can say that this is under fair use, and the amount that you used, whether it's a lot or a little. You mentioned that. You mentioned effect on the market. It doesn't always matter if you're making money or not, because there could be a situation where you're flooding the market with free versions of this person's copyrighted material, and they could say that you're having an adverse effect on their market. So the money part is a little bit squidgy.
Yeah, like let's say people were giving away an ebook of Sheldon books for free, but that's impacting my ability to sell a Sheldon book. Yeah, exactly.
So there's lots of things that come into fair use, and it's left intentionally gray because they don't want to lock down all kinds of creativity. They want to leave certain parts open. So they left it purposefully gray. However, when it comes to this specific question, right? When we stop talking about headline fair use topics and we start to see exactly what Sam is talking about, you've got a 100+ page comic based on the work of this band. You need to reach out to that band before doing the comic and talk about using their work. If you were going to quote the lyrics of a song in one comic strip that was going to be part of a collection of 100 different comic strips, this would be a different story. You'd put a little note there with apologies to the band or whatever. You'd just use a few parts of their lyrics and you'd be very, very much in the clear for something like that.
Or most likely in the clear, we should say.
Right. However, when we're talking about 100 pages, that's all based on the creative output of this band, then the answer is very, very clear. And you've got to treat that band the way all of us wish we were treated by AI.
Yeah.
And that is, you need to ask permission. Right? When the shoe's on the other foot, you got to do the thing. You've got to reach out there and ask their permission, knowing full well that the answer might be no.
Yes.
They might say flat out no. And by the way, let's face it, that's the reason that all of us are reticent to ask permission, is because we don't want to hear no.
Right.
But they might say no. They might not be comfortable with where you might take their creative work, and that's fair.
That's fair.
Also.
Yep.
They might say even worse, oh, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. But we want editing rights. We want to go in before this thing is published and make changes for all the things that we don't like or we disagree with, or we think that it could be done a different way. If you're going to use their creative intellectual property to do this comic, you've got to ask them permission, knowing that it might be any number of those things, including a fourth thing I didn't even mention. They might want some money or a part of the profit or some kind of financial remuneration for all of this.
Right.
All of those things are on the table. But I think the ethical thing to do there is that you've got to ask their permission.
Yeah. And it really does come down to just money aside, on an ethical basis.
Yeah.
If someone were to use your stuff, wouldn't you be chapped about it? You'd be like, darn it, why do they take my stuff? That's not fair. And they're using it in a context that I don't like or agree with, whether it's political, social, cultural. They're using it in a context I don't agree with, or even if they agree, they're using it in the correct context that I intended with my art. Sometimes the visuals of my art being reused are horrifying to me. I'm like, really? That's how you're going to draw my character? Or that's how you're going to do?
That's what you're going to do?
So like on an aesthetic level, on an ethical level, and a monetary level, all three of those might come in for a person being like, what? No, I don't want you using my stuff this way, you know? Yeah. And so because... Brad, just as a cartoonist to cartoonist, I have had people do fan art that I was so pleased as punch, that it was beautiful. Like they caught it was so different and in their style that they drew my stuff, but it caught the essence, the soul of what I try to put across in my art, right? But then sometimes you see fan art or people being like, hey, apologies to Dave Kellett, and you see the art and you're like, oh God, get my comics out of your mouth. That is terrible.
What just happened?
Yeah, it's like a Will Smith slap on stage. Get my comics out of your mouth. And so, because it's just like, it's not the vision that you have in your mind for your comics or your work to see it done XYZ way, you know, it doesn't matter what. I'm sure you've had that, right?
Oh yeah. I remember once Lar D'Souza did an illustration of one of my characters. It's like, gosh darn it, I wish I could draw that well. It's always they draw better than me or they don't draw as well as me, and there's problems on both ends.
Yeah,
you know,
it's true. It's true.
But for me, usually it's they draw better than me.
Yeah, I know. I hired Gurihiro to do a Drive short story, and their version of my characters was so much better that it actually made me mad. And I was like, dang it, this is so much
Happens
better.
to me all the time.
I know. But you're right. Because it's either going to be better than the way you draw it or way worse. And neither one is a happy outcome for you emotionally as an artist.
But I mean, it's happy and it's not happy at the same time. It's always a compliment, right? It's always getting that kind of thing.
It's not always a compliment. It's not always a compliment. So to get down to brass tacks here, what are you morally, legally, and financially obligated to do here, Sam? So if you're going to be having a big touchstone of your graphic novel and eventually your musical being this band's body of work or lyrics from this band's body of work, I do agree with Brad. You got to reach out. And usually that's a letter of explanation of what your intention is, how you intend to execute on it, what your vision for their art, how it will make it better. You will find that a lot of artists are actually kind of forgiving of other artists wanting, and complimented to Brad's point, that another artist has found enough joy and inspiration in their work that they want to leapfrog off it, which is a version of what you're doing. You're leapfrogging off it, right? And so I will just say, and this will be a boring 2-minute talk, but when I did the movie Stripped, it is a documentary feature, right? Which largely could fall under fair use. Documentaries are legally upheld in a lot of court cases as being cultural artifacts that are discussing art itself and discussing the world itself and trying to better society. And so documentaries like journalism,
it's educational.
Are largely held up as either educational or journalistic. And in so doing, they can fair use copyright pieces in their work. But Fred and I, my co-director and friend Fred and I, decided we were going to ask for permission for everything in the film.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, Brad, it was like 200 to 250 different pieces of art that we had to get permission for from either music holders, television and film holders, and stakeholders is what I'm saying, comics creators, graphic novelists, comic book companies, DC and Marvel at some points, Image, syndicates, newspapers, old newspapers that no longer existed. I'm not kidding. We had to track down who owned the rights. Sam, I'm just saying, thank God you have one source that you need to approach, right? Because you can write your best and most heartfelt letter and you'll find out what the answer is within a couple of weeks. I had to hunt down 200, 250 different sources, one of which was Angela Lansbury for Murder, She Wrote. And Angela Lansbury could not have been nicer, but God damn it was hard to track down Angela Lansbury. I had to use a bunch of my wife's Hollywood sources to get to...
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, but morally, ethically, legally, capitalistically, it was the right way to do it. And so we did it. I'm happy we did it. But I'm just saying, I see now why a lot of people use a piece of art and then ask for apologies rather than ask for permission. Because they're kind of rolling the dice and hoping that no one sues, even though you all have to remember, again, I am not a lawyer, but anyone can sue over anything. It doesn't even have to be legally justifiable. So if you said to yourself, could someone sue me over this? The answer is always yes. Yes, someone can sue you over this.
Yep.
The question is whether they're likely to, and then more importantly, whether they're likely to succeed. But yes, someone can always sue you over something.
Right. And it would be a little bit more complicated than just adding the word unauthorized to your book title.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You could say the unauthorized blah, blah, blah. And I've seen that strategy used at times. I don't know that it's bulletproof. I think the thing you've got to ask yourself is if you take this intellectual property away from the project, what do you have left?
Right. That's a good thing.
If the answer is not much, then or what I'm assuming would happen in the case of this jukebox comic, that it would fall apart completely, then I think you've got to ask the rights holder for their permission and be prepared to hear a number of answers. Let's face it, I listed 5 answers. that you don't want to hear.
Yes.
There's only one answer that you do want to hear, which is, yeah, let it rip. Let me know how it turns out. Right. And I don't want any involvement beyond that. That's the one answer you want to hear. And there's 5 other answers that you don't want to hear. But I think you got to do the right thing and ask the rights holder for their permission, because even though you know that it's going to lead to a whole lot of stuff like Dave just got done saying, they spent all kinds of time. And I know some of the people said, yeah, go ahead and use it. No problem. Some of them said, write me a check.
Yes,
some
they
of
did.
them had you write 2 different checks to 2 different rights holders.
Yes.
Right.
Some of them were time limited, like you have the rights for 5 years, which is, by the way, why the film is no longer on Netflix.
Right.
And so some of them said you have the right to it, but only in certain markets. You can't use it in this or that market, right?
Yeah.
By the way, all of which is their right to do.
Yeah, that's why
own
they're
the
the rights
copyright.
holders.
So it's completely separate from Brad's 5 answers that you don't want to hear. There's once you get permission, you kind of then have to ask, okay, how long do I have permission for?
Right.
In what markets do I have permission for? Do I have to do this for? In what mediums and formats do I have this permission for? If this graphic novel gets modified into a musical, do I lose the rights? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. These are the questions you have to ask, because it's not just, do I have the right to use it? And thanks very much.
Yeah.
You then kind of have to get into a more legalistic angle of like, what markets, for how long, with what money involved, in what further media separate from graphic novels could I adapt this to? It gets complicated real quick once you do have permission, you know?
And by the way, just to bring this whole conversation around, even though Dave and I put our teeth on edge when we look at a publisher or a platform that has a contract that says things like into perpetuity and irrevocable and worldwide and in all shapes
in all formats,
and forms,
known and unknown. Yeah.
Yes. Even though that makes us upset, and by the way, for good reason, and that there are some cases where we just won't do business there. We won't sign that contract.
Cough, webtoons.
I might be. Even though that's true, we can also see why you're the lawyer for that platform, if you're the lawyer for that platform, you're going to put words like perpetuity and irrevocable and blah, 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 blah in there, because it solves all the problems that Dave just got done talking about.
Yes, because I'll tell you what happens. All the movies and TV shows from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, one of the reasons why it's taken so damn long to get them on streaming networks is they don't have the rights to stream it. That is a new form of broadcasting that the original contracts did not allow for. So it took Disney a long time to go back and get the rights for a lot of stuff that was contracted out for film. Right? Mm-hmm. Theatrical release. And then, oh God, now we have this DVD format, which no one knew about. Oh God, now we have the streaming format, which nobody knew about. Let me tell you a little story about the song Happiness Hotel from the Muppets, arguably the greatest song in the entire Muppets oeuvre. And you can't find it on streaming. You can't find it on albums because no one got the goddamn rights signed in the right way. And so it's just this is in the weird copyright limbo, which very much exists in the modern world. This copyrighted limbo, which people own it, but they don't have the ability to license it and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, what I'm getting at, though, is Brad's right. One of the reasons why a lot of these companies get so grabby is it gets really complicated if they don't get grabby with everything, right? Their lawyer pulls their hair out because they're like, wait, do we have the rights to use it this way? Do we have the rights to use it that way? Who knows? Let's just ask for everything, you know?
Yes, and it solves all the problems, makes all the problems go away. Is that they just write one boilerplate contract, it takes everything, and then boom, you're done. You're over before you started.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's one thing about being over before you started is that when you finally do get to the end, you end up having to say something like this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my heavily copyrighted friend, Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com, and the co-host of the fantastic new drawing show at wrongwayshow.com.
And my trademarked friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com, and another fabulous co-host of The Drawing Show at wrongwayshow.com.
And I will put this big caveat on the entire previous half an hour of conversation. Neither Brad nor I are lawyers, Sam. So if you do want a very specific answer to this, you've got to go out to an IP lawyer. That is the honest to God's truth. Anyway, all right. So the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where we are burning up the podcast chart.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Comic Lab.
If you like pina coladas
No,
and getting
Brad,
caught
no.
in the rain.
No,
What?
you can't say that. No.
Oh my, it's Wrongo from the Wrong Way Show. How you doing, Wrongo?
Brad, as your duly acknowledged lawyer, I gotta tell you, that song is copyrighted up to wazoo. You can't use it. I'm suing you as your lawyer, Bradley.
What I love is after an hour of doing a podcast, Wrongo, you sound a little drunk.
Listen, day drinking is allowed in 38 states of America. It's up to you to guess what the other 12 are.